When I started recording these funny little reviews of the various seasons of Pretty Cure and the various movies of Pretty Cure and the various crossover movies of Pretty Cure, maybe I should try to find some of the live stage productions that could be kind of funny. I didn't think I was going to have quite as many thoughts on some of the earlier seasons, considering the time it had been since I had watched them. That kind of held true for the earliest seasons, but already with Yes Pretty Here, I had a lot more to say about them than I initially thought I would. And it kind of makes me want to go back to the original ones and do those again at some point. That could be kind of fun. But more to the point, I thought HeartCatch Pretty Cure was going to be what I continued to talk about for a very, very long time once I started talking about it. And I think I'm going to anyway, just because HeartCatch Pretty Cure was a lot of fun. I genuinely think HeartCatch Pretty Cure might be the best out of all of the seasons I have watched up to this point. And Max Heart may still be my favorite and hold a very special place in my heart, but HeartCatch has caught it too. The incorporation of the side characters into the day-to-day magical girling via the flowers of the heart, or the heart flowers, kind of whichever translation decides to go with at the time. I'm not sure. I think I saw both. Allows for a lot to be done with the emotional set pieces of any given episode, whether it be helping the side characters through their personal struggles, or mirroring what one of the main characters is feeling if it's an even less important side character, or getting double duty out of it and accomplishing both at the same time. Heartcatch may be peak for that reason already, but it also is a dramatic shift in the art style of the franchise. The art style has remained, while changing a little bit, largely consistent over the run of the show, from the original Futari Pretty Cure up to Fresh Pretty Cure. We've seen an evolution of it over the course of the years. It has gone on for several already at this point, but with a different animation director, the same one who did Ojamajo Doremi. The art style has changed dramatically. The colors are far more vibrant. They are not aggressive colors, but they are bright and they pop. And the characters got big ol' heads and big ol' eyes. They all look kind of goofy for that. But it's very fun. And it is really cool kind of seeing this, not quite chibi, but almost their style for the characters be the main art style for the show, countering the often heavy emotional episodes. Heartcatch Pretty Cure does a lot to sort of solidify the legend of the Pretty Cure that I think kind of holds throughout the next couple of seasons that I've already seen. Partially because this is the first season where the antagonists are going out of their way to attack the people around the Pretty Cure, and sometimes just randos who happen nearby, and then the Pretty Cure show up and save the day. Because they are pulling the monsters out of any given person to actually cause the problems for the Pretty Cure to fight. And it's kind of, that alone already kind of offers a fun aspect to the show, like I was talking about a little bit before. And the fact that the kind of the heart of the person is just outwardly discarded, and the bad guys do not care about that piece of it in any way, shape, or form, just kind of gives an interesting angle to the villains in this season, because they only need the part that are the person's regrets, or what upsets them, or what is currently eating at them. They can leave the rest of the person behind, and we get confirmation in the show that if the Pretty Cure don't defeat whatever monster of the week it happens to be at any given time, because their designs that change a little bit, their powers change a little bit, that person just stays trapped within that little orb basically forever. We don't really see that happen within the show itself, and it kind of would have been neat to see some of the older victims of this organization turn up in the form of these little orbs and show that this can happen rather than just being told this can happen by the characters. But it does kind of up the stakes a little bit because not only is the town and all of the people around them get attacked, but also they could just lose somebody forever if they fail to defeat the bad guy. They originally kind of almost make it seem like there's some sort of time limit on this, but maybe that was just me reading into how they described it, and it was more you just need to beat the bad guy rather than you have to beat them this quickly, otherwise, whoops, well, your friend is trapped as a monster forever until you kill them, I guess. But I don't know, it doesn't describe the exact mechanics of it in incredible detail. But what is cool about how the mechanics are described to the titular Pretty Cures in the show is that the two main characters for the start of the show, Blossom and Marine, get to have some of their explanations given to them, some of the exposition for the viewer also given to us by a former Pretty Cure. Still kind of current Pretty Cure, but retired in the form of Tsubomi's grandmother, who was a former Pretty Cure. We know that she was previously a Pretty Cure who actually defeated the leader of this bad guy organization when they previously tried to attack Earth. And we meet her mascot, and it's really funny because our mascots for Tsubomi and Erica, they also know of the grandmother's mascot, and it's just kind of fun establishing a legacy both for the Pretty Cure and for the mascot magical fairies that give them their devices and upgrades and powers and all of that stuff. Which is just one of the ways that HeartCatch goes about establishing the legacy of the Pretty Cure. We have the grandmother becoming one, and then basically passing on her knowledge to the current generation of Pretty Cure. And even before Tsubomi and Erica were Pretty Cure, there was another one we see very early on who does not actually join the crew until much later in the show, Yuri, who is Cure Moonlight. As we've come to find out, even though, like, just looking at her, we know at the start of the show, but it's kind of fun seeing the way that she eventually learns that she wants to keep fighting, even though she was utterly defeated. And starting off the show with the utter defeat of Yuri as Cure Moonlight was kind of surprising, which was another fun thing that HeartCatch did of giving us intrigue right off the bat. We see Cure Moonlight fighting to protect Otri, something, from a magical girl-looking character who is very clearly evil and beats her. And later in the show, we learn that her name is literally Dark Pretty Cure, and she was made specifically to defeat the Pretty Cure, and which was at that time only Cure Moonlight, who believed she could do everything on her own until her dog died. And that was another thing that HeartCatch did that caught me off guard. I wasn't expecting the fairy to die, and it did. And it was funny, but not like haha funny, but just like, oh, they're actually going to kill characters in this show. And granted, it was in a flashback that we actually see him die, so it doesn't happen in the show itself, but that's still an on-screen death. That little guy was in her arms and faded into stardust once she found her reason to fight and reason to continue to fight to protect her friends and stay with them forever and help save the Earth once again. Once she joins, they finally become their group of four, because before Yuri gets her fighting spirit back and becomes a Pretty Cure once again, they get Itsuki as Cure Sunshine, and she's very fun. I like her design. I like that she is kind of their martial artists, whereas Erica and Tsubomi are just kind of flailing, yelling, throwing themselves around. Sunshine has a little bit more oomph to her actions. And their attacks are another just kind of fun thing that the show does well. They have a variety of special moves that they use, but several of them are mostly they just kind of throw themselves at the antagonists. One of the attacks that Tsubomi uses several times throughout the show is she just yells something punch body part. Usually, like they use butt punch. She uses a full body punch at one point. They have a straight punch, which is just a regular punch. And this is just her throwing herself at the enemy as if she was an intercontinental ballistic missile. And you know what? Good for her. She's got that magical girl juice flowing through her veins, so she can absolutely just launch herself at the enemy. HeartCatch also gives us more fight time all over the place because, in addition to the main villains having monsters that they summon as per usual for the Pretty Cures to fight, but also they have minions, basically. They have Sentai generic enemies who kind of sound like monkeys just with the noises they make. But they just get thrown in there to cause problems and cause distractions and to kind of general get up to mischief and all of that. And those guys are fun to watch them, get beat up and thrown around. But it's always a fun time whenever they throw a bunch of these little snackies, I guess, at the Pretty Cure and watch them get blown up because Marine runs through them with her legs doing a Sonic the Hedgehog flailing her arms. Or Tsubomi shakes her arms, gets really energized, and then just kind of explodes. I think one of my favorite little clips I took of it as I was watching through it was just Marine yelling Marine Dynamite as one of her attacks, and she just kind of explodes. She uses Majin Vegeta's self-destruct to try to kill Boo, but it just blows up a bunch of monkey guys. And then we have, in that same shot, Yuri looking dramatically from the distance as these two goofballs fight enemies, and she is having the time of her life, parentheses negative, up there, watching all of this go down. In keeping with the idea of the legacy of the Pretty Cure that HeartCatch Pretty Cure establishes, more so than any other season before it, we have a series of episodes where, and it's not early on in the series, it's pretty late into it actually, but it's one of the few times where the show will cut its episodic nature in favor of back-to-back episodes. And it's not very many. It's like 2, maybe 3. But it was cool to see, nonetheless, that they basically have a little miniature training arc. They go through a couple of these as they kind of learn to control their powers a little bit better or work as a team a little bit better, as they are wont to do in any season. But in this case, part of that is becoming recognized by a sacred relic of the Pretty Cure in order to get the power that comes with the HeartCatch Orchestra. And the season has a lot of flower imagery because of everybody having a flower that represents them. But the orchestra thing kind of, I mean, it doesn't really involve anything else, but that's fine. I guess Sunshine has a tambourine, but they don't do a ton with the musical theming, but every season's got to have its theme. We'll give it a pass there. They're doing something fun with it. But they have to pass a trial, basically, to become recognized as Pretty Cure and to be basically put on, not display, but it makes a statue of them in the Hall of the Pretty Cure once they pass this trial and gain its power. And we see several other statues in there, and we know that there are probably many more, because with Tsubomi's grandmother telling us about this, we can infer that there are generations of Pretty Cure whose images are held inside this building to show any future Pretty Cure that this is where their legacy comes from. This is where, maybe not where it starts, but this is where they become recognized as Pretty Cure. And we get fun episodes out of that too, because it also does one of the things I like of they fight evil versions of themselves. But they're not really evil in this case. It's more just the darkness inside their heart or the doubts inside their hearts. And it's kind of cool seeing that they struggle a little bit with it, but Marine, Sunshine, and Moonlight don't really have much of a problem defeating it. They know what they're about. They know what they want to do. Parentheses, save the world. And they beat their trials and then are good to go. It is Blossom who ends up taking the most time in it, because she is the one who, out of all of them, has the most insecurities about being a Pretty Cure and being able to live up to the expectations that that entails. And she does, of course, overcome it. It would be kind of wild if a season of Pretty Cure had our main character completely failing in something that failure was not an option, because losing here means you are stuck inside of this trial, basically, until you die, is, I guess, the implication. It's unclear, because it was presented in such a way where they don't get out if they don't win. So what happens if they fail? We don't really get acknowledgement that any of the Pretty Cure of past generations have failed, just that it is a possibility. And I think, just kind of based on how the show operates, we can assume that any Pretty Cure who has undergone this trial would eventually be able to pass it, just because there is already kind of a strict requirement to become a Pretty Cure. Like they have some pretty intense emotional training along the way, but also only particular people are chosen as Pretty Cure. They already have to have pretty strong drive present within them for that to even happen in the first place. But they get their HeartCatch Orchestra, which lets them summon a giant woman to punch to death any of the antagonists they come across, which is also just a very fun power. This season has so many fun abilities. It also has the little seeds from the Tree of Life that their mascots poop out. And eventually in the show, they stop showing that part of the seed coming out of the mascot's butt, and then just cut it to like, oh yeah, they're doing that, but we're not going to show it to you because we've decided, all right, it was going to be funny, but maybe it wasn't as funny as we thought. Which I was kind of glad they stopped putting that on the TV screen anytime it was happening. I was like, I get it, I understand what's happening. You don't need to show me that part. But I liked that the different little seeds had different powers involved with using them. And I liked that they actually could use those. The super speed boost one was almost exclusively the one they used, but that's a cool power, and it gave them like a cool pinkish red Super Saiyan God looking aura whenever they were using it. And the scenes where they do use it are very cool. And the perfume one exists. They use it maybe twice. That's fine, I guess. It was okay. I think it was neat. It was fun. So I wish they had used more of those. That may be one of the only critiques I have, is I would they introduced the concept of these seeds having powers, and then they really don't do a whole lot with it, which is kind of disappointing. But what they did with them was fun, and I like that element of it. The antagonists of this series are also some of the strongest ones that the show has had, I think, because they have their personalities and they have pretty clearly defined traits to them, and they also bicker with each other and with the Pretty Cure, but they, or at least with some of them, they have a sense of pride and respect to what they are doing and in doing so, how they interact with the Pretty Cure. Kumojaki just wants to get stronger. He wants to fight and be strong to the point where he basically acts like our shonen character in this show. He won't fight them if they aren't at full strength. He will actively just ignore them and leave until they get stronger and can prove to be worthy opponents. He hopes they beat him quite frequently so that they can continue to grow stronger and to prove themselves as worthy opponents to him. Cesarina doesn't have anything like that going on. She's just kind of selfish and annoyed at everything and everyone, and that's fine. That's fun. That's good for her. We love a girl boss who is doing women's wrongs, and I guess that's why she's the one they end up killing. And it was really surprising when they actually addressed the fact that even though she turned into magic dust because they are evil antagonist desert apostle organization, they still addressed the fact that she died. Like the translation I watched, Marine specifically said, "Why do you think Sasarina smiled when she died?" to Blossom. And it was surprisingly emotionally heavy for the Pretty Cure when they beat, like, they know that they were trying to purify the hearts of the villains they are fighting. It isn't the first time they hit her with their purifying attack and HeartCatched her, but it is the first time that it worked fully and they beat her. And they were shocked by what happened. And Kumojaki and Kobaraja also were surprised that they beat her, and they were mad because that was their ally. And even though they bickered with her, and especially Kobaraja didn't, care as much because he's pretty much only caring about his own good looks, they were still friends with her. And I think that showed a really interesting angle to the antagonists that we don't always get in each season. It's like, yeah, we had a little bit of that kind of in Yes Pretty Cure 5 Go Go specifically, with our one of our antagonists starting over in the villain organization and kind of like working alongside some of the antagonists. And I guess in Max Heart we also did, because anytime they weren't out harassing children, they were at their mansion talking to one another, trying to figure out how to resurrect their Dark Lord, but also playing with the Dark Lord who was turned into a child. And they just kind of hang out and talk to each other. But they didn't have nearly as much personality as the 3 main Desert Apostles in HeartCatch Pretty Cure. And our final antagonist is a little bit more generic than them, because he is kind of just, I'm going to consume all worlds and turn them all into deserts because I can. But I guess it's sort of suggested that he is like that because of, I guess, wanting revenge on Kir Anji. And it's kind of fun seeing the design parallels a little bit between Tsubomi's grandmother, Kir Flower, and Kir Anji, but then also, even more so, the design parallels between the big woman who was summoned in the HeartCatch Orchestra attack and Kir Anji, who I guess she's like the progenitor Pretty Cure who sealed away the main antagonist, Dune, a million years ago, or whatever, however long it was, before he started causing problems again, and the Cure Flower sealed his another chunk of his power away. Or maybe she didn't. Maybe she just beat him and didn't seal his power away. I don't quite remember that, but I know Cure Flower sealed a bunch of his power away, and that's why he wants to beat the hell out of her so he can get his power back and return to his true peak form, in inter-peak performance form, which he does end up doing. And we get several episodes of the Pretty Cure going into space after the world has been turned into a desert. The only people who are surviving having been turned into crystals in this desert are people that the Pretty Cure have saved because they have purified their hearts, cleared doubt from their mind, and protected them from the influence of the desert apostles and their desertarianification of the planet. And they are cheering for the Pretty Cure. They recognize that they exist. And that is just another kind of element that the Pretty Cure's legacy is shown through in the show, because they know the Pretty Cure are protecting them. They know that they have been saved by the Pretty Cure. We even get that a little bit when they're trying to recruit Itsuki to become Cure Sunshine, because when they don't have her on lock yet, they are looking for the Pretty Cure. And every now and then the mascots will be like, hey, hey kid, do you want to become a Pretty Cure? You want to be a magical girl? And the person they're talking to is like, oh, word? On God? I mean, maybe, in a couple of instances. But at the end, they are celebrating the Pretty Cure, and they're like, yes, we know you can do it, Pretty Cure. Go beat up those bad guys. And then we get just those couple of episodes of the Pretty Cure rushing a space station, sneaking their way through part of it, fighting their way through another part. We get really cool climactic battles for all of them as they go to rescue Tsubomi's grandmother and then try to beat up the bad guys, because we get a standoff between Kumojaki and Sunshine. They have their cool dramatic fight, and Kumojaki, not Kumojaki, Kaparaja. She fights Kaparaja because he's like, oh, of course, only your beauty could stand up to mine. And then she beats his ass. And it's really good. Marine fights Kumojaki, and that one is really fun because they are both incredibly bullheaded, stubborn characters, and they just have a really cool fight. Both of these fights are really cool, but I really liked the Marine and Kumojaki one. And then Moonlight ends up fighting Dark Pretty Cure, and a little bit her creator, Professor Sabak, which had a twist that I didn't see coming initially. I can't remember at what point I kind of called it. The HeartCatch had some really good plot twists going to it, because Professor Sabak ends up being Moonlight's father, who went missing several years ago. He ended up, when he went missing, falling under the control of Dune. And part of his grief at losing his family is represented in the creation of Dark Pretty Cure, because he makes a daughter for himself to fill in the hole that he feels is there for the one he lost, or I guess left behind. And we see that like acknowledged and not respected, but reciprocated by Dark Pretty Cure, who actively calls him her father. And when Sabak is beating the mind control out of his body, we see Dark Pretty Cure get mad at Moonlight for trying to take her father away, basically. There is a lot of tragedy in the final fight between Moonlight and Dark Pretty Cure, and it does not have a happy end for Dark Pretty Cure. And it is really tragic. And it is such a good ending to her because of that. And we get some really good scenes between Tsubomi and Yuri as they are coming to the conclusion of this fight, because at this point Tsubomi has caught up. She hasn't had her real, like, she's had a pretty good run at the enemy spaceship base so far, but she hasn't had her one-on-one that they kind of get to a little bit, as she does end up fighting Dune, as they are wont to do in the Pretty Cure. But we get really good emotionally touching scene between Tsubomi and Yuri, of Yuri wanting to hate what has happened to her dad, what has happened to her as a result, everything involved in all of this. And she is talked down from this by Tsubomi, who recognizes that as Pretty Cure, not even just as Pretty Cure, but as a person, they can't move forward if they are so enthralled by their anger that they cannot see what they are doing. And I was not expecting the show to try to take such a deep stance, this deep into fighting the bad guys, save for the usual what you're doing is wrong because peace, love and peace, love and peace. But it was really nice seeing that outwardly stated towards the end of HeartCatch Pretty Cure. And the this just continues into the conclusion where they do basically fill the bad guy with love to kill Dune because they all. I read that in the anime version, they all fuse together basically to form the penultimate fight Pretty Cure named Infinity Silhouette. I had to stop there for a bit to actually find it because I could not remember her name for the life of me. But they fused their powers to become Infinity Silhouette in the anime version. But I read that in the manga version, the other Pretty Cures give their power to Tsubomi, who by herself becomes Infinity Silhouette. And I don't think that changes her design at all because Infinity Silhouette is kind of just a giant version of Tsubomi, but a little bit more magic up, I guess. But that's pretty obvious just from looking at her. But having a Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann ass ending final fight to this show where these two impossibly large planetary destroying beings are having their showdown is so cool, and it was such a dramatic and just epic in the literal sense of the word conclusion to the show. And the straight punch that is so dramatic, so overstated, only to gently press her fist into Dune's chest and him look at peace for the first time in the show is a really cool way for them to beat the antagonist. They use the power of love to murder this guy, but they do so with love in their heart and a fist in their hand. But I just also really love Gurren Lagann, so the Infinity Silhouette drop was very reminiscent of that, and it was very cool. It was just a really fun finale, and even after that, the Cures get to hang out together in kind of their post credits and stand around pretending to be dramatic because, yeah, we saved the world. What about it? And that's kind of the energy they're taking into their life after having saved the world. There is so much to like about HeartCatch Pretty Cure. It is a genuinely incredible season. It is probably the easiest one to recommend people start off with if they are already into anime. I think the art style could put people off if they are unfamiliar with if I'm unfamiliar with your game, that could be a potential problem getting someone into it. But if they're down to try something new, HeartCatch Pretty Cure could just be the easiest way to get anybody into the show. It has lots of comedy. It has very high emotional impact to a lot of scenes, and it handles those quite often really well. It is genuinely just a really good season, and I cannot recommend HeartCatch Pretty Cure enough, honestly. I do think it is kind of a 10 out of 10 season. It is so fun for so many reasons.